You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're here on the unceded traditional territory of the Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This is Bernadine Fox, here with my co-host for the week, Don Wright, bringing you Both Sides Now. Welcome to our show. I'm Bernadine Fox.
And I'm co-host Don Wright. Thank you for joining us today.
And this is Both Sides Now. Today we're talking with Steve Ferguson about the many levels of anxiety. About 12% of the adult population in Canada suffer from anxiety, and about 6% of children also deal with anxiety, and they often get overlooked as a population that might deal with anxiety because they're kids. When we say here on Both Sides Now anxiety issues, we're not talking about the nervousness that is normal in our daily lives. The type of anxiety, that type of anxiety comes and goes quickly. The type of anxiety we're talking about here hits and lasts for several minutes to several days. And the anxiety can be characterized by restlessness or being tensed or feeling in danger or panic. Your heart rate might go up, your breathing may go up. You might sweat and have visible muscle twitching or trembling. It can actually also go the other way. It might make somebody feel really weak and lethargic. They might have difficulty focusing. They might have difficulty sleeping and have stomach problems and do a lot of avoiding of the things that make you anxious, which to me sounds like a normal thing to do. They might have obsessions like obsessive compulsive disorder, although it's not quite the same as obsessive compulsive disorder, and they may, in that they may perform certain behaviors over and over. So let's start talking about anxiety, because many people don't discuss it. Many don't talk to their family physician about what they're coping with, and less than 40% receive treatment that they need. So, Steve, you have challenges around anxiety.
That's right.
Did you talk about this with your family physician?
Truthfully, there's kind of, I want to say, almost a stigma and a hesitation to doing so. It's something that I didn't want to approach truthfully with my physician the next time I go to see him, but I always kind of had the notion in my head that it was, almost wasting his time.
Oh.
That, I would go to see him, for, say, eczema or, if I was feeling particularly sick or whatever, but, there's automatically this sort of thought process in my head that, he doesn't want to hear about, the fact that sometimes I feel really, nervous or out of sorts or stuff like that. He wants to deal with like hard, tangible medical stuff, and that's the sort of thing that's I kind of grew up with, and that I think a lot of people did, is that, medical professionals don't want to have to hear about, your daily sort of mental stuff. They want to, hear about, oh, well, how's your stomach doing?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that is very true, and as you're talking, I'm realizing that I kind of do that too. It's like, I'm anxious, okay, so what? Get up and do it anyway, right? It's that kind of attitude that we discount the ways in which anxiety hit us, and for some of us, hit us in a way that's kind of debilitating and profound.
Yeah, really, it's only been seen how my son has been reacting to the medication he's on. That I'm like, it's something worth pursuing. The pediatrician for my son, she actually put it fantastically. She said the medication wasn't there to do the work and to help him, but it was to allow the work to happen.
Oh.
To help with some of his behavioral stuff. That it was an inroad. And he's been doing so well under it. I mean, he'll be the first one to say, oh, no, it's just because I'm getting older. Mm-hmm. But from an outside perspective, watching him, seeing his day-to-day, behaviors and interactions and how much more communicative he is, I'm like, well, maybe even if I don't feel like it's doing anything, would it make a difference in my interactions with other people? So
right.
It's really kind of, watching him, it's really kind of opened my mind to approaching, seeking medical, some form of medical intervention.
Can I ask what medication it is?
He's on Zoloft right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which is an antidepressant.
Yes. Yeah.
But an antidepressant that helps with anxiety. Are we right, Don?
Yes, that's true. I like what you said about the medication helps them do the work, because medication doesn't eradicate the problem, but it makes the problem manageable while you do the work to find a resolution for the problem.
Right.
Whether it's skill development or addressing some conditions in life that need to be rectified. So I like the idea that work is part of the solution.
And it's not the first medication he was on. He was on Prozac for a bit, but this is where keeping in touch with medical professionals is always, important, because he actually started, after becoming acclimated to it, showing a little bit of violent tendencies.
Oh, no.
Not like, he wanted to, like, strangle us per se, but he would lash out a little more physically. At least I hope not. He would lash out a little more physically. So we took that back to the pediatrician, and she said that can happen sometimes. Let's try a different route. Along the same same thought process, but let's try a different medication and see if he responds a little better to that. And so the constant communication is definitely a key as well.
And to just follow sorry, Don, something that you said about the medication is there to help learn different things. I just want to point out that there are some people whose brains function in such a way that they can't actually turn off the anxiety once it's turned on. And we understand this mostly out of fibromyalgia, where the pain gets triggered and the brain goes into a loop and it doesn't turn off, and so the pain is still there. At least that's how it's described to me. And the same thing happens with anxiety. It's actually a broken switch. And so they actually need some medication to turn it off, and a bubble bath isn't going to do it, or learning, a new technique of breathing and everything, because your brain physically isn't turning off that anxiety. So you were going to say something, Don?
I was going to comment that I think sometimes there are dietary considerations. I was talking to an MLA one time whose son was just a holy terror. Mm. And they wanted to put him on Ritalin, and she didn't want to go that route. So they explored some different issues, and they found out that he had a wheat allergy. So they removed wheat from his diet, and the kid just settled right down, became cooperative, became focused. So he had a wheat allergy, and discovering that really made a big difference in his behavior.
Well, that's good. I think that, there are so many things that really, when we think about it, that impact on our bodies. There's so many variables. It's an important thing to do, as you've done, Steve, which is to keep looking and keep searching and keep evaluating whether or not something is working for your children or for yourself as well. Have you done anything else in terms of, not medication, but say exercise or all these things they tell you, sleep, exercise?
Oh yeah, we were actually so hesitant on medicating because going back to Ritalin, there's, I think, a sort of an over medication for a lot of kids. Like, let's stick them on Ritalin. So my wife and I were very kind of we were resistant. Unfortunately, we're a little too resistant to medication at first. So yeah, we tried the diet stuff. We said, well, let's see if we can up his proteins, up his vegetables, cut out the sugars. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do about his sleep schedule. Let's see what we can do about socializing. We enrolled him in Scouts. Let's see what we can do about sort of training physically and mentally. So we enrolled him in martial arts to kind of bring some discipline in. And we just weren't really seeing much in the way of results, and a lot of honestly a lot of resistance from him for any sort of change. If we want to try something new, he wasn't on board at all, so sometimes it would be like dragging him out the door, and so it almost seemed counterproductive. It's like, well,
increasing his anxiety.
Right?
No, you have to go to Scouts. You have to.
Yeah, in the hopes that hey, you learn some skills. You learn to meet new people, and so for actually quite a few years it was very tough, and I feel still kind of bad that we waited as long as we did to medicate, but I wanted to also be in a place to know that I had tried other things as well.
And have you tried things for yourself?
Yes, I did actually. There was a point in time where I took up jogging and martial arts myself because I wanted to be in better shape for one, and also I've known of people who have legitimately really gotten a lot of discipline and stuff and confidence out of regular exercise and learning more cooking, for example, cooking at home and stuff, which I do actually find a very relaxing activity. But unfortunately, I mean, I guess part of the adulting thing is having to go to work, and at the time I was going to work in a pretty stressful and hostile at times environment, kind of in a way almost counteracts some of the positive things I was doing in my life. But I'm an adult, so it's just one of those things I got to do. I got to go to work. Okay, it sucks, yeah, but it sucks for everybody. So that's sort of the mentality that you get trapped into. So yeah.
So the question I have, though, if we go back to exercise, because you talked about exercise, did that actually help mitigate your anxiety, say, in your work environment? Was it something that reduced the anxiety there?
Well, sometimes yes and sometimes no. That's the downside, is that sometimes I did feel that it would help me focus and help me keep calm and stuff, but other times no. It wouldn't necessarily have an effect. And sometimes even jogging in particular, my martial arts instructor said jogging is lonely, and that's true to an extent, because it's you and your thoughts, and so oftentimes I'd have to listen to music. Otherwise, sometimes when it's just you and your thoughts, it's not always a positive sort of thing, and you start to fixate.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. I understand that at all, completely. So have you tried any medications?
Not yet, but again, just based on lately, to be honest, the last 6 months, my relationship with my son has improved so much. Even just that kind of put the bug in my head lately. It's just like maybe it's time to kind of stop being in a bit of denial about yourself, because I mean it's all I've ever known. It's all it's all I've ever felt has been like this. So I think in some ways it is a little scary to change how you view the world and what your internal dialogue is like.
Absolutely. We're going to take a little break, and we'll be back right after this.
I go to bed real early. Everybody thinks it's strange. I get up early in the morning. No matter how disappointed I was with the day before, it feels new. I don't leave the house much. I don't like being around people. Makes me nervous and weird. I don't like going to shows either. It's better for me to stay home. Some might think it means I hate people, but that's not quite right. I do some stupid things, but my heart's in the right place, and this I know. I got a dog, I take him for a walk, and all the people like to say hello. I'm used to staring down at the sidewalk cracks. I'm learning how to say hello without too much trouble. I'm turning out just like my father, though I swore I never would. Now I can say that I have love for him. I never really understood what it must have been like for him, living inside his head. I feel like he's here with me now, even though he's dead. It's not all good and it's not all bad, and don't believe everything you read. I'm the only one who knows what it's like So I thought I'd better tell you before I leave. So in the end I'd like to say that I'm a very thankful man. I tried to make the most of my situations and enjoy what I had. I knew true love and I knew passion, and the difference between the two. And I had some regrets, but if I had to do it all again, well, it's something I'd like to do.
Join Pro Bono Going Public for free legal advice this summer. They are hosting legal advice-a-thons throughout the Lower Mainland. Events will be held at Surrey City Hall Plaza on September 4th, Victory Square Park on Friday, September 6th, and the Vancouver Art Gallery North Plaza on September 13th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The events will provide free legal advice to low-income residents. Pro Bono Going Public will have lawyers rotating in hour-long shifts over the course of the day to provide free legal advice in all areas of law. Over the course of these events, they will have 112 volunteer lawyers registered. Again, events will be held at Surrey City Hall Plaza on September 4th, Victory Square Park on Friday, September 6th, and the Vancouver Art Gallery North Plaza on September 13th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Welcome back to Both Sides Now. We're here with Steve Ferguson talking about anxiety. And one of the things I want to ask you, Steve, is what did anxiety mean in your life? How did it come about? How did it show itself? How do you know it was anxiety?
Well, I certainly didn't at first. I mean, I was always a shy kid. And making friends was often very difficult for me, in part because I was, and still am in a lot of ways, very preoccupied by what other people think and seeking approval. And so oftentimes if I was worried that an interaction wasn't going to go particularly well, I wouldn't initiate it at all. So there would be times, definitely in adolescence, where I would undoubtedly seem aloof and impersonal. And usually it was just because I was too nervous as to where a conversation would lead, in that I would sound stupid or say something out of line, and so I just wouldn't bother. And that was just status quo for my day-to-day interactions with people. And the bullying in elementary school certainly didn't help. I mean, I was a pudgy kid and not very popular, and so pretty easy target.
You got bullied? Is that what you were saying?
Oh yeah, very much so, all the time. And so the only people that really I could interact with was my younger brother, and oftentimes his friends too. I just found it easier to interact with people who were younger than me. And then by the time in my later years, as an adolescent, when my mom had remarried to my now stepdad, and all the conflict in there, I began to recognize, anxiety and depression, and how they were going kind of hand in hand. And by the time I had moved out of home, it was what I wanted to specialize in college. There was an opportunity to get into a psychology program in post-secondary, which I pursued because I wanted to know, like, what was behind it, you know, what was kind of like piecing together parts of my own mind, really. And I want to kind of understand it a little better, to which I did, but to which I also learned it's not an easy thing to understand. You know, there's so much there, and, you know, with psychology and undoubtedly with medicine as well, you know, it's like an onion. You know, you get past the first layer, and then there's so much more to go. And
it's an ever-changing onion too. It doesn't stay static and sit still while you start peeling.
So I think you mentioned approval. Would you think that may be a standard feature of anxiety, just external opinions of people? And I'm thinking related to that might be a sense of safety in the world, because if you don't have approval, then maybe your level of safety you might feel is dropping down a bit.
I think so. I do. I think it goes hand in hand. I've always had a fear of authority figures, police officers, teachers. Big time. If I felt, you know, that I wasn't performing as the teacher thought I should be, that automatically the teacher hates me now. That was a huge part of my elementary and high school. It was only really in post-secondary then. Yes, okay, it's not personal. I had to realize. But also, I mean, going back to this notion of safety as well. You know, when my mom had married my stepdad, I had a very confrontational relationship with my stepdad, and oftentimes I would feel it was better to just not interact with him because I couldn't take the notion of getting into another fight with him over nothing. Right. He, in fairness to him, he has Asperger's and ADD, and so conflict to him is not as big a deal as it is to someone like me.
Right.
And unfortunately, conflict is a really big deal for me. I legitimately do not like conflict. I'd like to try to be diplomatic. I like to think I can be diplomatic, but as my wife will undoubtedly attest, there are some times where I just shut down, where I just I will start to process the other side of the argument in my head, and then, nah, that's stupid, or no, I don't even want to be bothered. And I think that's probably my worst aspect right now, is this unfortunate tendency in a conflict to just kind of shut down and retreat into myself.
So you avoid.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like to think I'm better at it now these days, but, you know, it absolutely still happens.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you as an adult, you get bigger and you get smarter and you get more able to cope with different situations. Your anxiety is definitely going to lessen. When was the first time in your life, if we look back at that stat, that 6% of children deal with anxiety in Canada, when was the first time you experienced anxiety that you can now look back at and say, oh, yeah, that's what that was?
There was a girl I really dug through, like really, really liked her through most of elementary school, and then a bit of high school as well. And then this sounds really, really dumb, but the idea of actually going and asking her out was like completely out of the ballpark for me. So I decided to write her a love letter instead.
That seems pretty normal for elementary school.
Thanks. That does make me feel better. But another girl, no, it's good. Another girl found out about it and then teased me about it in front of the whole class that I was staying in, and this was grade 9, and it wasn't just embarrassment. There was a different level to it as well. It almost felt like dying.
Yes.
It almost felt like there was nothing more I wanted to do than to stop existing and to run. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'd been teased before, and I'd been in embarrassing situations before. But
you were bullied. I'm sure that was something that you had a lot of experience with, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there wasn't. It wasn't just a matter of being embarrassed. It was the thoughts now of being aware of this girl that I've written this letter to, what she thinks of me, and that may now have that was too much to handle. The fact that now what are people thinking of me? Right. And now I have no control over that.
Right. That's unfortunately a hard situation. As you got older, how did anxiety manifest in your life?
I guess it's kind of exemplified best by an incident that happened, I want to say about 10 odd years ago. My best friend was holding a toga party at his place. And naturally, he had invited myself and my wife along. And for whatever reason, that evening, about an hour or so, the idea of going to it suddenly just completely filled me with dread. I couldn't handle it for some reason. Not that I verbally expressed this to anybody. No, they might think it was a dumb reason. So I made up a lame excuse about going to do laundry and blew him off. And
laundry?
Yeah, going to do laundry.
Somebody needed to have a conversation with you about how that's not a good excuse.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a toga party.
But
I get it.
I know it sounded stupid, but I felt maybe on a degree, well, it's rational, it's a chore, it's something I need to do as an adult.
Right.
But yeah, no, to this day I regret it because I could have just been straight up and honest with him and said, there's just today is just not a day that I can go out and socialize with people, and I apologize. But instead, I had to make an excuse.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to have that conversation in a society that doesn't really have an understanding of what anxiety is. I mean, we just look at the stats. People aren't talking to their physicians, and they're kind of, trying to stick it out. And so it's a situation where that's a really hard thing to explain to people, because they don't have I want to use the word respect, but that's not the word. An understanding of how anxiety can impact on people. I have a child who's involved in theater and has gotten up in the last 2 months every other day in front of an audience of 1,000 people and performed on stage with lights on him, and can still not go up to a McDonald's hamburger counter and order a hamburger. So anxiety and social anxiety are very particular things, and if we can inform the public a little bit more on just how debilitating that anxiety can be at times, your laundry excuse would make sense to a lot of people.
Right. Anything to get
Yes.
yourself out of a difficult situation.
Oh, I do it too, but I often do it because I'm tired. I have chronic fatigue, and not everybody understands what chronic fatigue means. They think that I should just sleep more or eat more vegetables, but I mean, sleeping more isn't going to make me any less tired. So you haven't done medication. You've lived with anxiety, by the sounds of it, much of your childhood and your whole adult life. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you learn kind of coping mechanisms. When I was in management, you learn how to kind of put on a brave face and things you can find to do that would keep you out of the public. It's like, well, I'm not kind of feeling very well, so this would be a good time for me to go, hide out in the stockroom and, and do inventory counts and stuff like that. So you start to learn little side escapes that you can do, and you become very reliant on those.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Has there been a time where the anxiety has been so overwhelming that you had to quit a job or move or make modifications in your life that were rather extreme?
There were certainly lots of moments when I wanted to. It has caused me to lash out.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that led to my career change last year was I worked the downtown east side at a theater, and sometimes when people don't get their way, they get very, very angry. But with the clientele that we were drawing, sometimes they get violent.
Right.
And as a manager, you kind of have to be the one to step in that case, because having somebody come in and threaten violence to a 16-year-old who's standing at the podium is completely unacceptable, and it's kind of part of the job that you be the one to intercede.
Yeah, I think it's probably in your job description.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it should be in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, I wish I was stronger at it and better at it. I would get these, particularly when a person was getting right up in my face about it. There was one guy affectionately nicknamed Fish Gutter because he had threatened to gut me like a fish.
Oh my God.
Most of the time they won't I'd say 99% of the time they won't actually act on their threats.
Right.
But that doesn't matter in the heat of the moment. So I would start trembling, like having very, very bad trembling in my hands. So I would adopt a manner where I would clasp my hands behind my back and try to appear as if I was in control, but the meanwhile be trembling. And after a really, really bad summer, I want to say, where it was relentless, a lot of violent threats, we would typically get these responses back from someone up in upper management who would say, we're sorry to hear that this happened, and if you have any ideas on how we can improve things, or if you need anything else, let us know. And I'd gotten so many of these emails; it seemed like a forum email,
Right.
So I sent an email back, and at the time I thought that I was being very fair and well worded and saying, it's not really helpful to get these emails. I would like to sit down with somebody and have some actual solutions to deal with this. But undoubtedly, and as my general manager at the time said, my tone was coming off very hostile. But it was a safe avenue for me. Sitting down at a computer and typing in an email was a very, very safe way for me to vent, even if not a very career-minded way to vent. It was. It was just kind of too bad. It was kind of like nobody wins in a scenario like that. Certainly, things didn't look very good politically for me. But by the same token, I was not in a good state. And when you feel like you're trapped, you kind of react out a bit like an animal.
Yep. No. And writing a letter is not. It's not like you were attacking somebody. You were writing a letter.
Right.
So anyway, we just need to take a little break here, and but don't go away, because we're going to be right back with Steve with some more information about anxiety.
And I'd give up forever to touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't wanna go home right now. And all I could taste is this moment, and all I can breathe is your light. And sooner or later it's over, I just don't wanna miss you tonight. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. And you can't fight the tears that ain't coming, the moment of truth in your lies. When everything feels like the movies, yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. And I don't want the world to see me, 'cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am. I just want you to know who I am.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox,
And I'm Don Wright.
and we're here with Steve to continue our conversation about anxiety. Steve, you mentioned that your wife also has anxiety issues. Can you talk about how that's been for you to engage in a very personal, intimate relationship with somebody who really, probably more than other people, might understand the kinds of issues you have around anxiety?
Yeah, it's our relationship kind of started. We were both volunteers at a camp, and the thing that really, truthfully, attracted me to her was that I could talk to her, and that was a very, very rare thing for me. Most of the girls that I was attracted to, and even still to this day, anyone I find attractive, I tend to avoid because the notion of getting in sounding stupid to them is often overwhelming. Whereas I could sit down and I could talk to her and I could laugh with her and I could have a great time, and that was unique. And at the very least, I wanted to be friends with her. At the very least.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, things progressed and we've been together now 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congrats.
And I mean, it wasn't even like, oh, I have anxiety. What kind of anxiety do you have, or anything like that. It was. I think we just kind of. There was a click. We kind of understood each other. But then, as we got to know each other, and I found out about some of the abuse that happened in her past, and she got to find out about my family dynamics and all this sort of stuff. We were able to talk to each other, and it was such a relief for me to be able to talk to somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and to really have a really good, meaningful conversation, no holds barred, and now. I would say even while we've been married, that we have an easier time understanding our anxieties and stuff like that. We complement each other. I have a harder time in social situations, where she is far better in social situations. But on the other hand, she can internalize work things
Right.
that happen at work a little differently, and so with these sort of complementary things, we can kind of be almost the angel on the shoulder for the other person,
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like you have a nice balanced relationship in that regard.
Oh, well, we certainly try, right? Having our son, who was a very difficult child, there was a degree of guilt on our parts, maybe unjustifiable guilt, that he had taken some of the aspects that we had been trying to conquer, and he was embodying a lot of them too. And so you want what's best for your kid, and you want your kid to be the best of you. And it's something as parents, you don't really consider going in, that they may kind of have the same demons that you do. And when you don't know necessarily how to battle them, how do you address them in another person who's totally reliant on you? And that was something that, all three of us had to learn together. And then, as I mentioned, when my daughter came along, she's a confident extrovert, and that was a whole other thing that we had to get used to. It's like, what do you mean you want to go talk to people?
Tell her to stop talking to people. I'm too scared.
Yeah, right?
So the other thing that happens as parents, unfortunately, is we role model to our kids in every waking moment and every sigh and every breath we take how to cope with life. And unfortunately, we pass on bad coping mechanisms when we ourselves are still learning how to change things in our lives. And so I'm really impressed on how the two of you have sort of looked at your child's needs around anxiety and have addressed that in a whole different way than you did for yourself.
Yeah, and as I said, he is in some ways a bit of an inspiration in that, okay, this has allowed me to see what's working. Maybe it's time that I actually address it with myself instead of being comfortable in my discomfort.
Right.
Right. Clearly, the three of you are able to support each other as you deal with this very serious issue. But I'm wondering what kind of support might be out there in the community. I mean, there's AA for alcoholics and there's NA for people with drug addictions. But what kind of support services, if any, are there for people that are suffering with anxiety?
It's if you had asked me that like 10 to 15 years ago, I would have felt very pessimistic about it and probably dismissive. But from the ground up, I can tell you right now, I'm seeing through social media, one of the good aspects of social media is there are a lot of people who are trying to destigmatize it. And I do have a lot of friends and even acquaintances I know who are saying, hey, look, even though I'm embarrassed to say it, here's the anxiety issues that I have. And that really starts to help from there. And truthfully, it was something I never really pursued myself looking at, but now, I think I'll kind of, like I said, start from the ground up and then go and approach my doctor and say, hey, I'm not just here for the eczema medication this time, here's, is there things that you can recommend? I do know for my son that a lot of these programs are difficult to get into. We were on the wait list for one that BC Children's Hospital is doing, and there was a center in Surrey that we were also on a wait list to try to get him some behavioral therapy. And you're met with a lot of wait lists. The Ministry of Children and Family Development, I think it's called, they've got a couple locations and one not far from us. And that one was tricky because the counselors there, are trying very hard to reach out and open a dialogue, but our son was just not interested in participating. That's kind of tough. So I mean, even watching that, and it has to definitely be kind of a two-way thing as well, because he was getting nothing out of those sessions, and here I am sitting, technically on the taxpayer's dollar with the ministry, while my son is just sitting there with his arms crossed and refusing to interact with the counselor there. I mean, that's kind of a humbling thing where you're like, oh no, now I got to find some other sort of thing to do. The one thing he did respond to, actually, sorry for cutting it.
That's okay.
The equestrian therapy. There's a place, Valley Therapeutic Equestrian Association in Cloverdale, which is a nice subsidized program where these kids of varying mental and physical disability can go and just ride horses and learn how to communicate with a horse. And he has responded so well to that. He's a little tight-lipped about it, but he goes and just to spend like a half hour learning to trot with a horse and stuff like that. I mean, that was shocking in how calming it was for him.
Wow, that's great. I think on one hand it's good that there are programs out there, but to me it's a little bit alarming that there are wait lists. It really speaks to the fact that anxiety is a fairly common problem if there are wait lists for these kinds of programs.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And actually, truthfully, a little frustrating too. I mean, we were trying to get Andrew evaluated psychologically through the school so that he could have, like an educational assistant with him. But although he was having anxiety issues, it wasn't as big an issue as what some of the other kids were going through. So there was a wait list even with that. And I mean, the downside is that, now Andrew's going into high school. So, I mean, he missed that entirely. And you can't really begrudge an overworked system, because naturally they do have to prioritize. If there's a kid who has like some legitimate, issues, or even something like dyslexia, there is a level of prioritization. Whereas, if you've got mild anxiety, I can understand why the school might be like, okay, well, if we got to choose between the kid who's mildly anxious and this other kid who, has, violent tendencies or whatever,
there is a priority list. It's true. But even if you don't get a psych ed test done with your child, you can still go in and talk with the teachers and ask them and get them to understand more about what's happening with your child, and hopefully you'll have more luck than I did in my child's high school.
Yeah, fortunately
we a whole other story, which we did finally get a psych ed test, but
fortunately we did have some really good teachers and principals, so we had a good IEP set
Right.
up for them and stuff. But yeah.
Good. That's good. There is an organization in BC called Anxiety Canada. Have you checked into that? Did you find
No,
that?
I didn't actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about them, but we will put them on the resource page for Both Sides Now, just as a part of this program. They're a charitable organization. They provide information and more. So I will put them on. I don't know a lot about them, so I don't want to talk about them too much because I just know that they exist. And I have gone to their website before because we deal with anxiety in our family as well. And they do have some suggestions and stuff, but I'm not sure that they do counseling. I think they're more a resource-based service. So, did you have another question, Don?
Not at the moment. Nothing really leaps out at me.
Why?
I'm feeling anxious.
Oh, that's funny. Steve, did you have anything more you wanted to say?
Just in that, I think it is good that a lot of millennials and Gen Z now, I guess, are willing to talk
Yes.
about it. And I do think that's the first step, because, I mean, I wouldn't, especially as a teenager, I wouldn't have talked to anyone
I don't
about
think
this.
I'm 60. I don't think you're 60 yet, but
Not quite.
but in my era, and probably yours, Don,
okay.
we did not talk about it. We didn't have a word for it. We didn't have word for most of our feelings. Never mind, being able to say this is anxiety and this is what I need. And you're right. The kids today, they talk about so much more than we ever imagined. I think more than we even talk about ourselves now. So I think it's great. I see my grandson and his kids supporting each other, excuse me, in a way that I have never seen before. It's actually kind of uplifting.
Well, I think, like in my day too, because I'm older than you even, any kind of mental illness or emotional distress was shameful.
Right.
People would talk about it as they wouldn't talk about it because it's a black mark on the family, to have some kind of problem you're dealing with. So it really has changed, and that's a good thing.
It has. Yes, absolutely. So we're going to end there. This has been our show about anxiety. And anxiety comes in a variety of ways. It can be a generalized thing. It can be a panic attack. It can be social anxiety. Phobias, obsessive compulsive, post-traumatic stress, all of these things come into anxiety. And anxiety goes hand in hand with depression. So your depression might actually just be coming out as anxiety. So thank you so much, Steve, for coming in and sharing all that information with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for
Very much.
having me. Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone. I walk this I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one. And I walk up, my shadow's only one who walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone out there will find me. Till then I walk alone.
You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox. Before we get to our segment on healthy boundaries, I want to give some resources on anxiety for folks here. One of the most easily accessible ones is a website. I already mentioned Anxiety Canada, all one word.com. Anxiety Canada has developed an app called MindShift CBT, which uses scientifically proven strategies based on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the CBT, to help you learn to relax and be mindful. It endeavors to help you develop more effective ways of thinking and use active steps to take charge of your anxiety. It does this by providing tools to tackle worry, panic, perfectionism, social anxiety, or phobias. What kind of tools? Interactive, cognitive-based ones, tools to ground yourself or shift your thinking, a thought journal to track that which traps you in anxiety, and some coping cards and ways to face fears, expand your comfort zone, and basically engage in healthy habits. I'm going to get a couple folks I know to check it out, and we'll report back to you whether it was helpful or not for them. But in the meantime, you can check it out yourself by downloading it from your app store or from Google Play. But that's not the only resource that Anxiety Canada can provide, so check out their website for more. Today on Healthy Boundaries, I am going to talk about some material that may be triggering for folks around sexual abuse, so a heads up. One of the biggest boundary infractions a therapist can make is our topic for today. It seems it should go without saying that a therapist should not engage in sexual contact or activity with their clients. However, given the high percentage of times this issue comes up, it seems we need to start talking about it more and out loud and a lot so that it is clear for mental health consumers. If someone has been sexually abused as a child, especially within a familial setting, boundaries around physical contact were never set for them, and while they may understand that it is taboo to have sex with their therapist, they may also not know or understand why that is important. Given the incredibly intimate relationship, albeit one-sided, that they have with their therapist, coupled with a lack of boundaries in their childhood, that sexual abuse may lead them to feel like the most natural thing in the world would be to engage in a sexual way with their therapist. Transference takes that idea and compels it forward. Sex is an activity that should be engaged in with two consenting adults. That means two people who are not just the age of majority, but who have equal power in the relationship. A boss is not equal to their employees. A minister is not equal to their followers. An adult is not equal to a child. And a therapist is not equal to their clients. No matter what the therapist says, to encourage this behavior, sexual contact with one's therapist will never be based on equality. And that means that as wonderful as it might seem in the beginning, eventually these relationships all fall apart. The foundation of it is built upon a desperate power imbalance that cannot be undone or avoided. For the sexual abuse victim, sex with one's therapist becomes a reenactment of their abuse. Therapists know of, or should know of, this incredible imbalance of power. Attempts to engage in a sexual relationship with someone who holds a significantly lesser degree of power is an abuse of that power. If you need more information, check out my book, Coming to Voice, Surviving an Abusive Therapist, or check out www.abuse-of-power.com, where you will find further resources along with a checklist on ethical boundaries in therapy. If you need further assistance, don't hesitate to contact us at our email or Twitter account, which will be announced at the end of the show. Next week, Annalise Shepherd will join us again to explore other ways that boundaries in a therapeutic relationship are important.
Join nonprofit society Beyond the Conversation for Vancouver's second annual Walk to End Social Isolation on Saturday, September 21st. This inclusive multicultural event draws on the communities of Greater Vancouver in an effort to draw awareness to the devastating effects of social isolation in modern society. Participants will gather at the Plaza of Nations at 750 Pacific Boulevard at 9:30 a.m. At 10 a.m., participants will walk along the seawall toward Olympic Village Square by the Creekside Community Center. From 10:45 to 2 p.m., Beyond the Conversation will host speeches, group conversations, and other activities at Olympic Village Square. On Saturday, September 21st, join Beyond the Conversation for the second annual Walk to End Social Isolation.
Our thanks goes out to Steve Ferguson today for joining us to talk about anxiety in his life, and to Don Wright for co-hosting with me, while we listened to Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls, Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day, and a novel one, Things the Grandchildren Should Know by Eels. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, bothsidesnow@coopradio.org, or via Twitter @BothSidesNowBC. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.
I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights. And it's alright, it's alright. Surely you don't have all of the facts. You could be just making it up. Why don't I ever think of that? It's some kind of magic in the words that you breathe, saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright, it's alright. A cliche, just words people say to be nice.